Too Much Salt and Pepper, Chapter 1. A highly seasoned welcome. One late May Day, when the magic of approaching evening was spreading over the North Country, there was a regal ceremony afoot in our forest sanctuary. Even a stranger to the region would have discerned as much had he looked or listened to the fuss and flurry which were taking place. The very air seemed to quiver with beauty and merriment. The sun was already in the afternoon sky, highlighting mountainous clouds which hung immobile at the horizon. All the far-flung beauty of the heavens lived again in the mirrored lake. An old crow hurried across the brilliant sky. Maybe to some his cry would have sounded like the familiar caw, caw, caw. But to us who stood under spell of the moment, it seemed he said, "Awake! Awake! All you children of the forest! The party has begun!" A belted kingfisher perched on a barren bough caught the spirit of the moment and playfully dived into the shallow water at the shore, uttering his raucous laughter as he rose on wing again. It was all wonderful to see. Graceful birches and sturdy oaks primped in the gathering evening light, proudly displaying their tresses of new-born leaves. Tiny star flowers and dainty violets strutted and posed their prettiest on the woodland carpet. Pine trees stood still and straight, add dignity to the scene. Juneberry blossoms flung their white beauty against the flaming color of the sky. "Awake, awake, they have returned, the party has begun," cawed the old crow, and the sky became dotted with many of his kind echoing his call. Surely something of importance and great joy was happening. An olive-backed thrush wove his song into the stillness. High in the brilliant heavens, an eagle circled in effortless flight, gaining for himself a superior view of the festivities. An enormous old heron glided into a little bay and settled among the reeds, steadied himself on one stilt-like leg, and stood as if he had suddenly turned to stone. A chipmunk raced to a vantage point on an old stump, and a red squirrel perched on the limb of a wild cherry tree, chattering loudly as if by his voice he could rivet the wilderness together. Ginny and I stood at the shore of this little forest lake looking upon this elaborate ceremony. Ginny is Mrs. Sam Camel. In her heart glows a love for the living and growing things of nature. Our canoe, loaded with luggage, floated where wavelets broke against the shore. Now we are ready to begin the last leg of our journey back to the sanctuary, our home. "The woods people need not have done all this just because we were coming home," said Ginny, referring to the carnival loveliness about us. "It is nice of them, but something simpler would have been sufficient, just to tell us we are welcome." But the wild world only became more beautiful and laughed at her call for moderation. Nature deals in extravagance. Sunset hues deepened to old gold. A soft breeze strummed on harps of pine trees, while linnets, white-throated sparrows, and grosbeaks sang in the still loveliness. Then into the scene came the clown, the joker, like the court fool of olden days. A loon flew low over the water like a winged arrow, uttering his half-hysterical cries and laughter. Without reducing his speed in the least, he dived directly into the lake, disappearing completely. Up he came now, skimming across the surface and beating the water with his wings, his cries more weird than ever. Alternately he flew, dived, and swam in craziest manner, shrieking, calling, laughing wildly. His voice echoed along the lake shores. He answered the echo, and the echo answered him, until the region fairly vibrated with his voice. We laughed. This was a royal welcome indeed, and this bit of clowning by the loon added zest to it. And now, as we put out from shore in our canoe, gliding silently over what seemed to be a lake of gold, we knew well that there were more events of surprise and delight to come. Our canoe trail would lead us from this lake, whose shores we had reached by a narrow woods road, through a charming channel into another lake where no road had yet touched. In this second lake nestled a little tree-covered island, and upon it stood a cabin that was tiny too. This was the aim and end of our journey. Our hearts were beating hard when we rounded the last point of land and the island came to view. It too had been prettied up by nature for our homecoming. The sun was a great red ball at the western horizon. It peered through the pine trees as if it were stealing one last look before retiring. Our clowning loon shot through the sky overhead, screaming in wild happiness. "He's just telling them all we have arrived," affirmed Ginny. "Certainly makes us feel important, doesn't it?" How we hoped that his calls would tell Minnie that we had arrived. Those wooded shores about us were the homes of some very precious forest people. "There is a deer!" exclaimed Ginny, pointing to the shadowed depths of a little bay. Could it be Babette? It could be Babette, though we could not know for sure. This was where Babette had lived when we knew her and petted her as a fawn. The woods back of the bay were sacred to us too, for in them had lived Inky the porcupine. Inky, the old rascal Porky, who had given us so many lessons and so many problems during the time we raised him and turned him loose in the forest. Inky of the sharp teeth. Inky of the many quills. Inky with a sense of humor that had made him an expert and adorable pest. Would he still be there, and would he know us? And there's that high ridge of maple trees where we always thought Rack and Ruin lived, exclaimed Ginny excitedly, pointing to some distant groves. Yes, Rack and Ruin, our friendly raccoons, had lived somewhere in that region. Would they still be there, and would they know us? Would Sausage, our woodchuck, come back to be our friend again? Only the hours and days to come would give us our answers. But now we were approaching our island, and our eyes and ears and thoughts strained with anticipation.